So you're Blues captain Ryan O'Reilly, and you want a haircut that's as custom as your stick curve. At Great Clips, we save your haircut details in clip notes, so you get your signature look every time. We got you, and you got this. Great Clips, official hair salon of the NHL.
With our NHL insider from TSN and the Darren Dreger Hockey Podcast, our buddy Darren Dreger on the eve of free agency when he does all his best work. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing okay, fellas. Yeah, the countdown is on. Not sure where
to summer or to free agency. What are you more excited about?
A little bit of both.
Well, yeah, I don't want our hockey fans to hear what my answer truthfully would be, but no, you know what? I'm not going to sit here and profess to work harder than anyone else. And then I look at the NHL players and the organizations and the league and the Players Association and all the volunteers and everybody that poured everything they had into this season to make it as normal as possible, including last week, which was tremendous, in Montreal at the draft. So, it's unfortunate that it's basically the middle of July and we're on the cusp of free agency, but I'm looking forward to a break and then looking forward to next year and getting back to the normal schedule.
Well, let's start with yesterday's news before we move on to JT Miller and elsewhere, because, wow, the unqualifieds are anything but this year, Darren. A lot of teams decided to walk away from restricted free agents, fearing the arbitration process, or in some cases not believing them worth the qualifying offers. I mean, it looks like there's going to be a huge reordering of bottom sixes and third pair defensemen this summer.
Yeah, look, if you're in that market, Matt, and so many teams are, right, especially the cap teams, you should be able to pick a decent quality player. You should be able to, because, for as many players that were left either unqualified or just wide open moving forward here, and there are some that were qualified that probably aren't going to play on their teams, right? Because, they too are going to have to be addressed. The team just wasn't in a position yet where, they could make that decision. So it is going to be interesting. Some of those players, I think of the Strome brothers, are probably going to get snapped up relatively early. I look at Kubalik in Chicago, who wasn't qualified. I mean, didn't have a very good year, but, you look at the goal scoring history of him and, is there depth interest in that quality of player? I think the list is going to go on and on and on. And then I think of those, again, who weren't qualified, like Brett Howden, who plays with the Vegas Golden Knights, and they've essentially got a deal ready. It's going to be finalized here. They just, needed for cap reasons not to go through the ceremony of the qualifying process. But all of this is a clear byproduct of a flat salary cap, right? And until that changes, NHL clubs just don't have an option. They've got to make real difficult decisions at a much younger date than historically they've had to. The protection of that player from a club perspective isn't what it used to be.
And that absolutely tracks. That seems what is happening out there. But what does that do now to the rest of this week, do you think? Because with all this talent out there, hey, the constraints are still there, as you said, because of the low salary cap. But you do need players. You need to fill out your roster. So I anticipate there's still a bit of a frenzy, isn't there? Even if the numbers are a little suppressed.
I think so. Again, when you look at how the tiering goes with the free agents moving forward here, of course, we're looking at Johnny Gaudreau, and Nazem Kadri isn't going to have a problem finding a job. I mean, multiple teams would be after both those players. John Klingberg, top defenseman by a lot of people's standards in the National Hockey League. He's going to have an opportunity. What is going to become of Evgeny Malkin at 35? It's still a star player in the NHL. So from a TV and a fan interest perspective, I think there's still a lot of meat on the bone. I do. But when you get below that top tier, then I think that's when clubs will start to play a different version of hardball. And they'll be more picky. And then maybe that's when, JT Miller comes into play. Because, if you're the Calgary Flames, as an example here, and just for sake of conversation, they don't get a Johnny Gaudreau extension done. Well, they got to dive deep into the pool. They've got to try and convince Nazem Kadri that Calgary is the best fit. And if they're not able to do that, then they look at some of the other more interesting unrestricted free agents, but that's probably not going to be enough. So Treliving might be able to turn two players into one pretty quickly, and a player like Miller or a player that is believed to be at least somewhat in play around the National Hockey League becomes that much more appealing.
I was going to say, well, one of the big names, of course, is Evgeny Malkin, and it shocks me that a guy who spent that much time in one place, and that alone isn't shocking, then the player leaves, but still competitive team, still has Sidney Crosby there as a cornerstone, and Sid's not slowing down to any discernible degree. What do you think's behind Malkin's departure? Is it as much about the team as it is about Gino's decision?
Well, you know what? It's more about the team, to be fair. And I think Ron Hextall thought that, he was going to be able to work something out. And technically, he still can. You're talking about an iconic figure here, a star player who's beloved by Penguins fans around the world. They just couldn't close on a fourth year. I mean, as Rob Rossi of The Athletic reported, Pittsburgh technically didn't put that fourth year in play. And I think it got to that place. Okay, Letang gets signed, Rust, go down the list. Ricard Raquel comes after, but they would have been working on and negotiating a Ricard deal as they're also trying to make something happen on Evgeny Malkin's status. Maybe it would have been different. Maybe they would have had to push away or do something a little bit more creative to get Raquel done in the future. But they've moved away from Evgeny Malkin. That's how I read that 6-year agreement and big money for Ricard Raquel. I think that when it got to the point of me tweeting yesterday, Evgeny Malkin had enough. He's just like, all right, if I'm the last guy left standing here in Pittsburgh, no, I'm willing to take my chances on unrestricted free agency. He's never been a free agent before, so I'm sure he's been frustrated by this process, very disappointed, as others would be. I mean, I think of Sidney Crosby. This isn't the way Sidney Crosby likely envision his time with Evgeny Malkin ending, but Malkin's going to have options. He will. I mean, he's got enough left in the tank to be a star player in the NHL. He may not give you 82 regular season games. You might have to manage that schedule a little bit, but if he's healthy and you're a playoff team, he can be a difference maker still.
Malkin, Kadri, Dubois, lest we forget, the Stromes, Kopp, Stastny, Trocheck, Yarncroc, Monahan, Scheifele, Taves, and then we get to the wingers. Are the Canucks just going to have to wait out summer free agency before a JT Miller trade? Do you see any way that they can make a Miller move before free agency and the high-end centerman, maybe wingers too, settles until the dust settles? Yeah.
I don't think so, Matt. And look, I knew this would be a prime topic on the show, so I checked before we signed on, and it's quiet. But Jim Rutherford publicly stated that you got to be careful, right? Because when you rush into a deal, it can be a bad deal. And his wealth of experience taught him that a long time ago. And as we talked about earlier, I'm sure that's what Vancouver is waiting for. Not every playoff team or team that believes they are a playoff team, maybe even a Stanley Cup contender, are going to get the player that they're hoping to get in free agency. It doesn't work that way. It never works that way unless you're willing to grossly overpay. So maybe there is a fit that makes sense. And maybe they feel like, okay, well, we can't wait for JT Miller to pop back into the trade market around the NHL trade deadline next season. Let's make the best deal we can make right now, because he's going to make us better. And that's what Vancouver has to be waiting for. And if that deal doesn't materialize, then JT Miller stays with the Vancouver Canucks. And maybe the idea of, an extension, which, by the way, hasn't really been talked about between Vancouver and the Bartletts, who represent JT Miller, in probably a month or so. But that can flip pretty quickly. So Vancouver still has plenty of options where JT Miller is concerned.
What you say they haven't talked? Does that mean like meaningful talks, or you don't think they've actually picked up the phone?
No, I mean, we got to be careful with semantics there. I know there's a good relationship between the Bartletts and Patrick Alvin and Jim Rutherford. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to suggest that there's any animosity that would lead to them not having any communication. It's just when I say they haven't talked, I don't think that they've actually crunched numbers in the better part of a month or so.
Do you think the Canucks are worried about Miller and his price tag having sticker shock for acquiring teams?
Well, you don't know that until you engage in the trade negotiation, and then you're given an allowance to speak to the Bartletts, right? Scott and Brian and Steve. And then at that point, you're going to know. But, Rutherford and Alvin have a real strong sense as to what it's going to take to lock this guy up long term. And they'd probably be willing to share that. But again, you don't get to that place. Normally you don't. Sometimes you do. If you're just working hard because you feel like you got to move the contract, well, then you allow the agent to have permission to speak to whomever he wants about trade. That isn't the case with JT Miller. So that's a step in the process, but I don't think they're at that point yet.
Are you buying this Patrick Kane and New York Rangers scuttlebutt that, now that the Hawks are going through the huge rebuild, that Kane will want out and that the Rangers might be a preferred destination?
Yeah, the Rangers are always a preferred destination, right? Like, when the Mark Scheifele rumors circulated after he made the comments that he made following, the end of the season with the Winnipeg Jets, instantly, he'd be such a good fit in New York with the Rangers. Okay, well, they've got pretty good centers, right? Like, what are they doing with Mika Zibanejad? Last time I checked, he was pretty solid. And then Pierre-Luc Dubois, let's it be known that, he's not signing beyond, his restricted free agent bridge, so that's going to facilitate him walking out the door if Winnipeg goes along with it. There's another Ranger rumor. The Rangers just always seem to be caught up in this because that's the history of the New York Rangers. And when I look at Patty Kane, do I see him as a good fit? I see him as a good fit on just about every team because I still believe he's a star. He's a dynamic player. How are they fitting that cap hit, without moving a ton of bodies out the door? But the whole Kane scenario, guys, obviously requires our attention. And I'm going to talk a little bit more of this on Insider Trading, but, I had a chance to speak with Pat Brisson in Montreal, and he hadn't spoken to Taves and Kane and Seth Jones at that point, but I'm sure he has now. They just want the dust to settle. Let things calm down a little bit and then decide what's the best path moving forward. Is it to play out the contract in Chicago? Is it to start the season in Chicago, see how things are going? And if they're going terribly, as they probably will, given everything Kyle Davidson has done, then maybe you entertain the notion of trade at the trade deadline. If that's the case, then that's a different beast. That opens the door to all sorts of different possibilities for the New York Rangers or any other team. It isn't going to be hard to find interest in Patrick Kane, but they're just not there yet. They weren't blindsided by all of the trades because you could see it was, a rebuild in the making. But this isn't a rebuild. Normally a rebuild is you keep your young players like Doc and DeBrincat, and you rebuild with those guys as your primary pieces. Davidson has torn it right down to the wood, and I can't imagine that Kane and Taves and Seth Jones were expecting that.
What do you think of the goaltending market right now? And hey, I actually am a bit of a Kyle Dubas fan. I think he's a smart guy. I'm shocked that Matt Murray is his choice. And I feel like Edmonton is in the same kind of boat right now of, what are you really going to do that's going to make yourself tangibly better for both of those teams? Goaltending was so important. What do you make of that Leafs trade? And then what do you make of, a team like Edmonton's chances of finding the right goalie too?
Well, I'll tell you, it speaks to desperation.
Yeah.
So I look at New York, I look at Tampa Bay, I look at Vancouver, and I look at the Calgary Flames. And those four goaltenders and those four organizations are as good as it gets. And there are others that deserve honorable mention. But imagine going to sleep at night and not having to think about goaltending. What a luxury that must be. Because Kyle Dubas has been sweating it out. I don't, for the life of me, understand why Jack Campbell couldn't be their guy, but he's not. And they never really engaged in any sort of negotiation. Dubas and Jack Campbell had a meeting on the weekend, very friendly discussion, but there was no indication that they had interest in bringing him back. Don't know why. It's a curious one. And we may not ever know the full story there. They're banking heavily on Matt Murray being the goalie that he was when Pittsburgh Penguins were winning Stanley Cups. But I say this about Matt Murray. There was a body of work last year in Ottawa where he was really, really strong. He was good. He was healthy. So I think that's exactly what Toronto is looking at, and absolutely hoping for the best, hoping that their defensive structure is tighter, that their high-end talent that they have in Matthews and Marner and Nylander, et cetera, are going to be able to offset any weak goal or defensive blunders, all of that. If the gamble works, then Kyle Dubas looks like a genius. If it doesn't, he's probably fired. I mean, that's kind of where they're at. But the goalie market, I don't remember it being as thin as it is right now. Washington moves out their goalies, including Ilya Samsonov, who didn't get qualified. And now they've basically showed their hand, haven't they? I mean, they're going to pay for Darcy Kemper. Now, that's likely what's going to happen. And Edmonton, I mean, they're going to pay for Jack Campbell. That's probably what's going to happen, because beyond that, there just isn't much available.
Take me into the right shot defense market, Darren. This is a position of great need for the Vancouver Canucks. I've heard Klingberg attached to Seattle, who have some money to spend, and would like to know what you're hearing about the Kraken off-season plan. And then all of a sudden, Brent Burns is available in San Jose, although apparently wants to get to Dallas because he owns a home there.
And his cap hit is like $100 million a year too.
Yeah, so. Exactly. Well, he's a little pricey.
Yeah. It's not the deepest market either, right? And you just nailed two of them. And I'm curious about those who are in the market, right? Ottawa has been lumped in with perhaps showing some interest in Brent Burns. I think there have been a few teams, and we shouldn't be entirely surprised by that, aside from what Blake just alluded to, and that's a tremendous cap hit. John Klingberg is an unrestricted free agent. He's going to have his pick of the litter. And, there are a number of teams, Ottawa included, that definitely are looking for that right side, right shot. Mackenzie Weegar's name is out there, right? And that's an interesting one for me. He's got short-term available, and there's no chance that Florida is giving him away. But Florida has needs, and they've got some other areas that they've got to pay attention to from a contract perspective. So they might have to make a trade that they don't love the idea of having to make it. And Mackenzie Weegar's name has been out there floating a bit, and has been out there in connection to the Ottawa Senators as well. Just honorable mention, by the way, I'm talking a lot about Ottawa, but deservedly so. What a pile of work Pierre Dorian has done, dating back to, what was it, the Colin White buyout, and then he drops the bomb of acquiring Alex DeBrincat, moves Matt Murray. What else? I mean, he's been very active. He will add another defenseman in some capacity, and you still have the Zaitsev and the Connor Brown rumors swirling out there. So I don't think there's a busier GM than Pierre Dorian these days.
And then lastly, just because he's young and affordable, and we know Arizona, I know Arizona is in no rush with Chychrun, but what are you hearing, if anything, on Jacob Chychrun?
Yeah, as of last night, it was pretty quiet. And Bill Armstrong has done his work on this. And again, for the same reasons that I'm hesitant to read too much into it, as we were leading up to the trade deadline, and that's where I sit right now. They've got him under contract at good value. They are going to have to ice a roster that at least gets them to the floor of the salary cap. I can tell you, the way the agents talk about dealing with Arizona, they feel bad for Bill Armstrong, because the situation in Arizona is so tough financially, with ownership just watching every penny that goes out the door, that just kind of simple things are magnified because of the dollars attached. So because of that, Bill Armstrong has to continue to work at it as far as Jacob Chychrun is concerned. But I felt like there was something developing at the draft with any number of teams, and it just didn't get the traction and it didn't materialize. So as of last night, as I said, it's quiet. So things can change with a phone call. But again, maybe that's one similar to JT Miller. If the teams that are looking for a free agent defenseman don't get one, but feel desperate that they need one, maybe they try and make a play on them.
Well, if you're telling me ownership is watching every penny that's going out the door, are you telling me that everyone had to go into their own pockets for those electric blue suits at the draft that ownership wasn't footing the bill for the Taylor.
They had the
to
fancy
go
liners.
electric route?
They had the fancy lining.
Was that Bill Armstrong going out of pocket
Well,
for all that?
Well, no, I don't think he went out of pocket, but yeah, I don't want to say too much about that because I could tell you that there were some who were forced into uniform that didn't love the idea
Yeah.
of wearing matching suits.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
we all got a chuckle out of it and continue
Yeah.
to get a chuckle out of it.
No, exactly. You know, you're finished your playing days. You think you're out of uniform. Alas, not if you're
Apparently
executive
not.
with the Arizona Coyotes. Buddy, we know you're hitting the cabin next week after free agency. Darren, can't thank you enough. A fantastic
great
year
season,
here
man.
with
Thank
us. And our first year full one in the digital space. So appreciate this, my friend. Have a wonderful summer.
Yeah, guys, thanks for everything. I appreciate it as well. And as I've told others, I mean, I'm basically off the grid, under the radar, but who knows? If something just significant happens in Vancouver with the Canadian team, I could be coached into another one.
There you go. And we may see you again. Who knows? Maybe later this summer if you get together with Ray out here. So look forward to it, my friend.